Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of English Story Hub. Imagine this, you're in a busy shopping mall, surrounded by bright displays and racks full of clothes. You spot the perfect jacket, but then you freeze. You don't know how to ask the shop assistant if they have it in your size. You feel nervous, maybe even embarrassed, but don't worry. Today, I'm here to help you. In this lesson, we're going to learn 50 essential English sentences for real shopping situations. These are not just boring textbook lines. These are practical, real-life phrases that you can use whether you're buying clothes, groceries, electronics, or souvenirs. By the end of this episode, you'll feel more confident walking into any shop, asking the right questions, and understanding the answers like a native speaker. So grab your notebook, get comfortable, and let's dive right in. Section 1. Starting a conversation in a shop. When you walk into a shop, you'll often need to start the conversation. Let's look at the first 5 essential sentences. Sentence 1. Excuse me, do you work here? Use this when you're not sure if the person is a shop assistant. Maybe they're folding clothes, maybe they're just another customer. This is a polite way to check before you ask a question. Sentence 2. Could you help me, please? Simple, polite, and very useful. It signals to the assistant that you need assistance. Notice the word please. It makes you sound respectful. Sentence 3. I'm just looking. Thank you. Sometimes when you enter a shop, an assistant might ask, "Can I help you?" But maybe you don't want help yet. This phrase allows you to politely say no without sounding rude. Sentence 4. Do you sell? ? This is a direct way to ask if the shop has a specific item. For example, do you sell phone chargers? Or do you sell winter coats? Very useful when you're not sure if the shop stocks what you need. Sentence 5. Where can I find? If you know the shop has the item, but you don't know where it is, this is the perfect phrase. For example, where can I find the dairy section? Or where can I find jeans? See how easy that is? These first 5 sentences already cover the most common way to begin your shopping conversations. Section 2. Asking about sizes, colors, and variations. Once you've found what you're looking for, you often need to check details. Let's explore the next set of sentences. Sentence 6. Do you have this in a different size? Essential for clothing. You might love the shirt, but it's too small or too big. Use this phrase to ask for another size. Sentence 7. Do you have this in a different color? Sometimes the item is right, but the color isn't. Maybe you like the jacket but don't want it in green. This is how you ask. Sentence 8. Can I try this on? Super useful in clothing shops. Always ask before entering a fitting room. In American English, you'll often hear, "Can I try this on?" In British English, people also say, "Can I try it?" Both are correct. Sentence 9. Where are the fitting rooms? If you want to try clothes, but you don't know where to go, this is the polite question to ask. Sentence 10. This doesn't fit me. Maybe the size looked right, but when you tried it, it was too tight or too loose. This phrase communicates clearly that the item doesn't work. Sentence 11. Do you have a bigger size? A more specific version of sentence 6. Very direct, very clear. Sentence 12. Do you have a smaller size? The opposite. If the shoes are too big, this is the sentence you need. Sentence 13. Could you check in the back? Sometimes the assistant says the item is not available on the shelf, but maybe they have more stock in the storage room. Use this sentence to ask them to double check. Sentence 14. Does this come with a warranty? Now we're moving into electronics and higher priced items. A warranty means a guarantee from the manufacturer or shop that they will repair or replace the product if it breaks within a certain time. Sentence 15. Is this on sale? Many shops offer discounts, but they don't always display them clearly. This is how you ask if there's a special price or discount on the product. Oi, so far we've covered how to start conversations, ask about products, and check details like size, color, or warranty. Already you're building a strong foundation for shopping in English. But don't stop here. In the next part, we'll go deeper. You'll learn how to ask about prices, how to pay, and how to return items if something goes wrong. Trust me, these phrases will save you a lot of stress. Section 3. Talking about prices. How much is this? This is the most basic and essential question when shopping. Use it when you want to know the price of an item. Is the price correct? Sometimes the tag on the item doesn't match what shows at the cashier. Use this phrase to politely ask for confirmation. Do you have anything cheaper? Useful when you're on a budget. For example, in an electronics shop, this phone is too expensive. Do you have anything cheaper? Sentence 19. Do you have anything more expensive? The opposite. Maybe you want a higher quality or premium option. For example, do you have a higher-end laptop? Sentence 20. Is there a discount on this item? Great to use during sales seasons. For example, is there a student discount on this jacket? Sentence 21. Can I get a student discount? Many shops, especially in university towns, offer discounts for students. Always good to ask. Sentence 22. Can you give me a better price? This is more common in markets or independent shops where bargaining is possible, not usually used in big supermarkets. Sentence 23. Is this the final price? Similar to bargaining. It's a polite way to check if negotiation is possible. Sentence 24. How much is this after the discount? Sometimes the discount percentage is shown, but the final price is not. For example, how much is this after the 20% discount? Sentence 25. Is this included in the sale? Not every product is always part of a sale. For example, electronics might be excluded. This question saves confusion. Section 4. Payment and methods. Sentence 26. Can I pay by card? One of the most useful sentences today. In many countries, cashless payment is common, but always check before paying. Sentence 27. Do you accept credit cards? A more specific version of sentence 26. Sentence 28. Do you accept cash? Believe it or not, in some modern shops, cash is not accepted anymore. Always useful to ask. Do you accept mobile payments? With apps like Apple Pay, Google Pay, and WeChat Pay, this is increasingly common worldwide. Can I pay in installments? Useful for expensive items like furniture, electronics, or jewelry. Installments mean paying a little bit every month instead of all at once. Do you have contactless payment? If you want to tap your card or phone instead of inserting a chip or swiping. Do you have a loyalty program? Many shops offer points, rewards, or cards for regular customers. This is how you ask. Can I have a receipt, please? Always important after payment. The receipt is proof of purchase. You'll need it if you want to return or exchange the item later. Could you email me the receipt? Many shops now offer digital receipts. Saves paper and keeps your proof of purchase safe. Do you need my signature? In some countries, when paying by credit card, you might need to sign a receipt. This phrase prepares you for that moment. Great job so far. We've now covered how to ask about prices, discounts, and how to pay. These are some of the most practical sentences you'll ever need when shopping abroad. But what happens if something goes wrong? Maybe the product is broken. Maybe you want to return it. Or maybe you're shopping online and need help. Don't worry. In the next section, we'll cover sentences for returns, complaints, and online shopping. Stay with me, because those final 15 sentences could save you a lot of stress and money. Section 5, Returns and Complaints. Sentence 36, I'd like to return this, please. Simple and polite. Use this when you bring an item back that you don't want anymore. Sentence 37, I'd like to exchange this for a different size. Very common for clothes and shoes. For example, I'd like to exchange this for a smaller size. Sentence 38, I'd like to exchange this for a different color. Maybe the product fits perfectly, but the color isn't right. Sentence 39, I think this item is defective. Use this when something is broken or doesn't work properly. Sentence 40, can I speak to the manager? If the shop assistant cannot solve your problem, this is the phrase to use. It's polite but firm. Sentence 41, do I need the receipt to return this? Many shops require the receipt, but not all. It's best to check first. Sentence 42, how long do I have to return this? Return policies are different everywhere. Some allow 30 days, others 7 days, some even 90. Can I get a refund? A refund means getting your money back. Important to know. Sentence 44. Can I get store credit instead? Sometimes shops don't give refunds. Instead, they offer store credit, which allows you to buy something else. Sentence 45. What's your return policy? The best question to ask before buying something expensive. Always know the rules in advance. Section 6. Online shopping phrases. Sentence 46. Does this item include free shipping? A very common online shopping question. Shipping costs can sometimes be more expensive than the item itself. Sentence 47. How long will delivery take? Useful when ordering online or even in store for home delivery. Sentence 48. Can I track my order? With tracking, you can see where your package is and when it will arrive. Sentence 49. Can I cancel my order? Sometimes you change your mind. This phrase helps you stop the purchase before it ships. Can I return this if I buy it online? Online returns are not always as simple as in-store returns. Ask this to avoid frustration later. And there you have it. 50 essential English sentences for real shopping situations. Think about it. With these phrases, you can now start conversations with shop assistants, ask for sizes, colors, and fitting rooms, handle prices, discounts, and payment methods, manage returns, complaints, and refunds, shop confidently online. Shopping is something we all do, but it can feel stressful in another language. The good news is that now you don't have to worry. With these 50 sentences, You'll feel more confident and more natural every time you walk into a store or click Buy Now online. My advice? Don't just listen to this episode once. Play it again, repeat the sentences out loud, and practice shadowing my voice. The more you use these phrases, the faster they'll become part of your everyday English. Before we go, here's a quick challenge for you. The next time you go shopping, try using at least 3 of these sentences. Even if it feels scary at first, I promise the shop assistants will understand you, and you'll feel proud of yourself. Thank you so much for joining me today on English Unleashed the podcast. If you found this lesson helpful, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends who are also learning English. And finally, I'd love to hear from you. What's the most difficult shopping situation you've faced in English? Write your answer in the comments below, and let's keep learning together. Until next time, happy shopping and happy learning.